What are you doing out here, Elena? Alexander Thorne's voice sliced through the biting New York dusk, sharp with shock he couldn't mask. It was too late, too cold for anyone to be in this desolate lot, the only sound his boots grinding against frost-crusted gravel. He nearly drove past the battered truck, just another shadow in a city of forgotten souls. Over years of building his empire, he learned to look away. Homeless figures were just noise, not his problem, not his world. It wasn't heartless, it was survival, a shield to keep his focus razor sharp. But something about this truck, the way its fogged window framed a small, curled figure, stopped him cold. A worn scarf, a familiar curve of a shoulder, his breath caught, recognition slamming into him like ice. Elena, his former maid, the one he'd fired without a thought, now sleeping in a truck, her life shattered by his indifference. Hit like and subscribe to follow their fight for justice. You're late again, Ramirez. Alexander Thorne's voice sliced through the air like a whip, his eyes narrowing on Elena as she burst into the executive suite, coat still dripping from the morning rush. No hello, no pause. He slammed his fist on the mahogany desk, scattering papers. 10 minutes. In my company, that's 10 minutes of stolen time. From me, from shareholders. You think your excuses fly here? Elena froze, chest heaving, her calloused hands clutching a crumpled hospital slip for her son. Mr. Thorne, it's my boy. He had a seizure on the subway. I had to save it. Alexander cut her off, rising from his chair, face flushed with contempt. Always some story. Train delays, sick kids. You're not irreplaceable, you know that. Immigrants like you flood this city begging for jobs, then slack off. He jabbed a finger at her, voice dripping venom. You clean my floors, Ramirez. That's it. Not my problem if your life's a mess. Her jaw clenched, teeth grinding against the surge of fury. She straightened, eyes locking onto his without flinching. It's not an excuse. It's life. Real life. Not your boardroom games. Alexander laughed, a sharp barking sound that echoed off the glass walls. Life. This is my empire. I built it on discipline, not sob stories. He snatched the intercom, barking into it. Security, get up here, now. Turning back, he sneered. Pack your things, you're fired, effective immediately, and don't expect a reference. Latecomers don't deserve one. Elena's fists balled at her sides, nails digging into palms until blood welled. The room spun with humiliation, but she held her ground, voice steady despite the storm inside. You don't even ask. You just assume. Assume. He stepped closer, towering over her. I know your type, always taking more than you give. The door burst open, two guards flanking her. Escort her out. Make sure she doesn't steal anything on the way. One guard grabbed her arm, rough, unyielding. Elena yanked free, fire blazing in her eyes. Don't touch me! She gathered her bag, stuffing the hospital slip deep inside, her movements deliberate, defiant. Whispers rippled from nearby staff, but Alexander silenced them with a glare. Back to work, or join her. As the guards hustled her toward the elevator, Elena shot one last look over her shoulder. One day, Mr. Thorne, you'll see the cost of your discipline. The doors slid shut, sealing her exit with a final ding. Alexander paced, adrenaline pumping, but a nagging twist hit his gut. He kicked her forgotten glove under the desk, muttering, Good riddance. Yet his hands trembled slightly as he resumed his call, the words tasting bitter. Outside, Elena stormed into the street, rain pelting her face, masking the hot tears she refused to let fall. She hailed a cab with shaking hands, directing it to the hospital where her son waited, alone. Back in the suite, Alexander's secretary handed him a file, but his mind replayed her words, a crack forming in his iron facade. The firing spread like wildfire through the lower floors, whispers of injustice fueling quiet rage among the staff. Alexander dismissed it, diving into emails, but one anonymous message popped up. The basement holds more than dust. He deleted it, scoffing, yet unease lingered, a seed planted in the chaos he'd unleashed. Elena stood rigid in the rain-soaked street, the hospital slip crushed in her fist, her heart hammering like a war drum. The sting of Alexander's words, your type, always taking, burned deeper than the cold biting her skin. She wanted to scream, to storm back into that glass tower and hurl his arrogance in his face. But her son's face flashed in her mind, pale, fragile, waiting in a sterile hospital bed. She swallowed the rage, her teeth grinding so hard her jaw ached. No begging, no breaking. Not for him. She slung her bag over her shoulder, the weight of it heavy with the few possessions she'd grabbed. A worn photo of her son, a cracked thermos, and that crumpled hospital bill. 2,187 still owed. The crowd parted around her, New York's pulse indifferent to her ruin. A janitor from the company, Miguel, lingered nearby, his eyes soft with pity. "Elena, you okay? That was brutal in there." She forced a tight smile, her voice low but steady. "Brutal's nothing new, Miguel. I'll manage." Her words carried a quiet steel, a promise to herself more than to him. She turned away, refusing his offer of a coffee, her pride a shield against the world's pity. "Tell the others I'm fine, and watch yourself in there. Thorne doesn't see us." Miguel nodded, hesitant, but her gaze held a warning. "Don't follow." She walked off, shoulders squared, each step deliberate despite the tremble in her legs. The rain hid the fire in her eyes, but not the resolve. At a street corner, she paused, staring at the company's towering logo, gleaming through the storm. "You'll see the cost," she whispered, her words a vow, sharp as a blade, slicing through the din of the city. Inside, the office buzzed with unease. A receptionist whispered to a colleague, "She didn't even cry, just stood there, like she knew something we don't." The air felt heavier, charged with the weight of Elena's departure. Her silence wasn't defeat, it was a challenge, a spark that lingered in the minds of those who'd watched. Miguel slipped back to his post, muttering her words to himself, a ripple of defiance spreading among the lower staff. Elena reached the subway, her soaked shoes squeaking on the platform. She didn't look back. Her son needed her, and that was enough to keep her moving. But her final words to Alexander echoed in her mind, a prophecy she didn't yet understand but felt in her bones. The city roared around her, oblivious, but something had shifted. An invisible line crossed, a reckoning set in motion. Alexander Thorne leaned back in his leather chair, the hum of the executive suite now a dull roar in his ears. Elena's parting words, "You'll see the cost," clawed at him, sharp and unrelenting, like a splinter under skin. He shoved the thought aside, focusing on the spreadsheet glaring from his monitor. Numbers. Control. That's what mattered, not some housekeeper's dramatics. Yet his fingers twitched, betraying a flicker of unease. He kicked at the floor and something skidded, a tattered hospital slip, half hidden under his desk, missed in the chaos of Elena's exit. He snatched it up, the paper crinkling in his grip. His eyes scanned the text. New York General Hospital, patient, Javier Ramirez. Balance, 2,187 due, immediate. The date was today. A handwritten note scrawled in the margin read, "Seizure meds overdue." His stomach twisted, a cold jolt slicing through his arrogance. Elena's voice echoed, "It's my boy, he had a seizure." He'd cut her off, hadn't listened. The slip trembled in his hand, a silent accusation. He pictured her rushing through the subway, her son's life hanging by a thread, while he'd sneered about discipline. "Damn it," he muttered, crumpling the paper. But he couldn't toss it. Instead, he smoothed it out, staring at the numbers like they'd rewrite his mistake. His pulse quickened. Guilt, unfamiliar and raw, gnawed at him. He'd built an empire on precision. But this was a miscalculation, a human one. He buzzed his secretary. "Clara, find out where Elena Ramirez lives, now." Clara hesitated, her voice crackling through the intercom. "Sir, she didn't leave an address, not after today." Alexander's jaw tightened. Of course she didn't. He'd thrown her out like trash. He stood pacing, the city skyline mocking him through the glass. The slip sat on his desk, a ghost he couldn't ignore. Then his computer pinged. An email, no sender, no subject, just one line. "The basement sees what you don't." His brow furrowed. Spam? A prank? He deleted it, but the words lingered, cryptic and unsettling, like a riddle tied to Elena's departure. He glanced at the hospital slip again, its edges worn from her grip. Had she been carrying this for days? Weeks? The image of her pleading, cut off by his venom, burned hotter. He grabbed his coat, a decision forming before he could second-guess it. He'd find her. He had to. Downstairs, the office buzzed with whispers. Elena didn't deserve that, a janitor muttered to a clerk. Thorne's losing it. The air felt charged as if Elena's exit had cracked something open. Alexander ignored the stares, his mind locked on that slip in the cryptic email. He stepped into the elevator, the doors closing with a hiss, sealing him in with his guilt. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the city felt colder, sharper, as if waiting for his next move. Somewhere out there, Elena was fighting a battle he'd made worse, and something in that basement, whatever it was, seemed to know it. Alexander Thorne's Bentley sliced through New York's dusk, headlights carving the rain-slicked streets of the Bronx. The hospital slip sat heavy in his coat pocket, its edges sharp against his fingers, a constant jab at his conscience. Elena's words, "You'll see the cost," looped in his mind, each syllable a lash. He gripped the wheel, knuckles white, his usual control fraying. He wasn't used to chasing ghosts, especially not ones he'd banished himself. The city's pulse mocked him, horns blaring, neon signs flashing, while guilt gnawed like a blade twisting deeper. He had to find her. Not for her. For him. His first stop was Elena's last known address, a crumbling tenement in Mott Haven. The landlord, a wiry man with a cigarette dangling from his lips, squinted at Alexander's tailored suit. "Ramirez, she's gone. Couldn't pay rent after you canned her." His sneer hit like a slap. "Heard she's living in her truck now. Good luck." Alexander's jaw clenched, but he pressed a $100 bill into the man's hand for more. "Try the lot by the old warehouse on 138th. Seen her there." The warehouse district was a maze of shadows, littered with broken bottles and rusted chain-link fences. Alexander's car felt out of place, a gleaming intruder among abandoned lots. He parked near a cluster of vehicles, makeshift homes for the city's forgotten. His breath caught as he spotted it, a battered blue pickup, its rear window fogged, a faint light flickering inside. Elena. His heart thudded, a mix of dread and resolve. He stepped out, shoes crunching gravel, the air thick with oil and despair. He rapped on the truck's window, sharp and urgent. No answer. "Elena, it's Thorne. Open up." Silence. He knocked again, harder, his voice cracking. "I know you're in there. Please." The door creaked open, revealing Elena, her face drawn, eyes red but fierce. Beside her, a boy, Javier, no older than 10, lay curled under a thin blanket, his breathing shallow, a pill bottle clutched in his small hand. The sight punched Alexander's gut. "What do you want?" Elena's voice was ice cutting through the damp air. "I was wrong," he said, the words spilling out, raw and unpolished. "I didn't listen. I'm here to fix it." Her laugh was bitter, sharp as broken glass. "Fix it? You think words fix this?" She gestured to the truck, the boy, the hospital slip now pinned to a makeshift dashboard shrine. "You threw me out. My son's meds are late because of you." Alexander flinched, her truth a hammer to his pride. "I saw the bill. I'll pay it. All of it." He pulled out his checkbook, but Elena's hands shot up, stopping him. "I don't want your charity. I want my life back." Her eyes burned, unyielding, and he saw the weight of her fight. Years of scraping by, invisible to men like him. He lowered the checkbook, shame flooding his veins. "Then let me help, not just money, a job, a place for you and Javier." His voice shook, unfamiliar with pleading. Elena studied him, her gaze a blade dissecting his soul. "Why now?" she asked, softer but no less guarded. He hesitated, then admitted, "Because I can't unsee you anymore." The confession hung heavy, a crack in his armor. She didn't answer, her silence louder than words. Javier stirred, coughing weakly, and Elena's focus shifted, her hand brushing his forehead. Alexander caught a glimpse of the hospital slip, its numbers a silent scream. He noticed something else, a faded employee ID from his company tucked in her bag, her face younger but no less resolute. Elena, I'm not leaving until we talk, he pressed, stepping closer, his shadow falling across the truck's interior. She looked up, her expression unreadable. Talk doesn't change the past, Mr. Thorne, but if you're serious, you'll have to prove it. Her words were a challenge, a door cracked open, but not yet inviting. Alexander nodded, his resolve hardening. He'd find a way to make this right, even if it meant dismantling his own world. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. A second anonymous email. The basement waits for you both. He froze, the cryptic warning tying his fate to Elena's in ways he couldn't yet grasp. Elena slammed the truck door shut, the clang echoing in the empty lot as Alexander's taillights vanished into the night. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the fire in her chest. His apology, raw as it was, felt like a trap. Men like him didn't change overnight. She turned to Javier, his small frame huddled under the blanket, eyes fluttering in restless sleep. Her jaw tightened, teeth grinding against the weight of her reality. No time for Thorne's guilt. She had a son to save. The lot was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional clatter of a loose bottle rolling in the wind. Elena lit a small camping lamp, its weak glow casting shadows across the truck's cluttered interior. Empty water jugs, a half-eaten loaf of bread, and a stack of job flyers she'd collected. She pulled her coat tighter, her breath visible in the chill, and checked Javier's pill bottle. 2 doses left. Her heart sank, but she shoved the fear down, her resolve a steel rod in her spine. She'd been through worse, crossing borders, losing her husband, scraping by in a city that chewed up dreams. Thorne's world wasn't hers, but she'd carve out a place for Javier no matter the cost. She stepped outside, locking the truck, and headed to the corner store, her worn boots crunching gravel. The clerk, Maria, a fellow Mexican immigrant, nodded knowingly. "Still fighting, Elena?" she asked, sliding a coffee across the counter. Elena's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Always." She paid with crumpled singles, her fingers brushing the hospital slip in her pocket, its numbers a constant pulse in her mind. Back at the lot, she handed out extra bread to a group of homeless teens camped nearby, their grateful nods fueling her. "Keep your heads up," she said, voice steady, her eyes carrying a warmth that defied her exhaustion. By dawn, Elena was at a community center, scrubbing floors for cash under the table. Her hands moved fast, calluses burning, but her mind was sharp, calculating. Every dollar went to Javier's meds. A co-worker, Rosa, whispered about a soup kitchen needing volunteers. Elena signed up, not for pay, but to network, to find leads on steady work. "You don't stop, do you?" Rosa said, half admiring, half worried. Elena's response was a shrug, her hands never pausing. "Stopping's not an option when you're all someone's got." At the soup kitchen, she served meals, her movements precise, her smile a quiet gift to those in line. A man in tattered clothes gripped her hand, murmuring, "You're one of us, but you don't act broken." Her chest tightened, but she squeezed his hand back. "None of us are broken, just bent." Her words carried weight, a lifeline thrown to others while she clung to her own. She overheard talk of a job fair, jotting it down, her mind already planning the next move. Javier needed her strong, not shattered. Back in the truck, she sat beside Javier, reading him a worn comic book by lamplight. His weak laugh was her anchor, pulling her through the ache in her bones. She tucked him in, her fingers brushing his feverish forehead, and whispered, "We're getting out of this, mijo. I promise." Her voice was a vow, unyielding, even as her eyes stung with unshed tears. She pulled out her old employee ID from Thorne's company, staring at her younger self, hopeful, unbroken. She hadn't noticed the small note tucked behind it, a scrawled warning from a former coworker. "Check the basement files. They hide the truth." Elena's pulse quickened, her fingers tracing the words. The basement again. That cryptic email Alexander had mentioned? It wasn't random. Something was buried in Thorne's empire, something she'd been too invisible to see before. She tucked the note away, her mind racing. She wasn't just fighting for Javier anymore. Whatever was down there, it was calling her name. Elena's truck door creaked as she pushed it open. the dim glow of the camping lamp casting jagged shadows across the lot. Alexander stood there, his tailored coat absurdly out of place among the rusted hulks and littered gravel. His face was taut, eyes flickering with something raw. Guilt, maybe, or desperation. Elena's grip tightened on the doorframe, her knuckles whitening. "You're back," she said, voice sharp as a blade, cutting through the night's chill. "What's it this time, Thorne? Another check to ease your conscience?" Alexander flinched, his hands shoving deeper into his pockets. "I meant what I said, Elena. I want to help. Not just money. A job. A place for you and Javier." His words stumbled, unpracticed, like a man unused to begging. "I was wrong. I didn't see you. I'm trying to now." Her laugh was a low, bitter slash. "See me? You saw a problem to sweep out. My son's fighting for air while I'm fighting for scraps, and you think words fix that?" She stepped closer, eyes blazing, her breath clouding in the cold. Javier coughed softly inside, and her head snapped toward him, softening for a split second before hardening again. "You don't get to play savior after burning my life down." Alexander's jaw clenched, but he didn't back down. "I'm not playing. I'll cover Javier's bills, hospital, meds, all of it. And I'm offering you a role at the company. Not cleaning, something real, you name it." He pulled out the crumpled hospital slip, holding it like a white flag. "I found this. I know what I cost you." Elena's eyes narrowed, scanning his face for lies. Her fingers twitched, resisting the urge to snatch the slip. "A role?" she scoffed. "So I can be your token redemption story?" "No. If you want my trust, you earn it. Start by listening." She crossed her arms, stance unyielding. "I'm not your charity case. I want answers. Why me? Why the rush to fire me?" He hesitated, shame flickering across his face. "You were easy to dismiss. I didn't think. I just acted." His voice cracked, exposing a fracture in his armor. "I'm here because I can't undo that moment, but I can try to make it right." Elena studied him, her heart a war drum. His words rang true, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Fine," she said finally, voice low, deliberate. "Pay the bills. Get Javier a doctor. But I'm not stepping back into your world unless you prove it's not the same one that chewed me up." She paused, eyes boring into his. "And you start by fixing what's broken in that company. I heard things, whispers from workers. Your empire's rotting from the inside." Alexander nodded, a spark of resolve igniting. "I'll look into it. Whatever you know, tell me." He stepped closer, voice urgent. "And that email, the basement waits. You know anything about that?" Elena's breath caught. She reached into her bag, pulling out the faded employee ID and the note tucked behind it. "Check the basement files. They hide the truth." Her pulse quickened, the words tying to his cryptic email like a noose tightening. "This was left for me years ago," she said, handing it over, her fingers steady despite the storm in her chest. "Someone knew something. Maybe they still do." Alexander's eyes widened, scanning the scrawled warning. "The basement," he muttered, a chill creeping into his voice. "What the hell are they hiding?" He looked at her, a new weight in his gaze. "If you're in, I'm in. We'll find it together." Elena held his stare, her mind racing. This wasn't just about her anymore. Javier, the workers, that note. Something bigger was buried in Thorne's tower, and she was done being invisible. "Deal," she said, voice like iron. "But if you cross me, Thorne, I'll burn your world down myself." She turned back to Javier, tucking the blanket around him, her resolve a fire that wouldn't fade. Alexander stood frozen, the note in his hand a ticking bomb, linking their fates to a truth neither could yet see. Victor Harlan's office reeked of cigar smoke and arrogance. A corner suite perched high above New York's skyline, its glass walls framing a city he saw as his chessboard. Alexander stood rigid, the cryptic note. "Check the basement files. They hide the truth," burning a hole in his pocket. Elena's challenge echoed in his skull. Fix what's broken. He'd come to confront his COO, but Victor's smirk, sharp as a switchblade, already set his nerves on edge. "You're wasting time, Alex," Victor drawled, leaning back in his chair. his silver cufflinks glinting. Chasing after some fired maid? You're softer than I thought. Alexander's fists clenched, nails biting into palms. Her name's Elena, and I'm not chasing. I'm fixing a mistake. She's back, Victor, in a new role, and she's got questions about how we treat people downstairs. His voice was steel, but Victor's laugh cut through it, low and venomous. Questions? Victor stood, circling his desk, his eyes glinting with menace. You let a janitor dictate terms? You're CEO, not a damn social worker. He jabbed a finger at Alexander, voice dropping to a hiss. I heard about your little stunt, paying her kids' bills, digging into worker issues. Drop it. You don't want to know what's buried in this company. Alexander's pulse spiked, the basement note flashing in his mind. Buried, he snapped, stepping closer, their faces inches apart. What's that supposed to mean? What are you hiding, Victor? His tone was a blade slicing through the room's tension. Victor's smirk didn't waver, but his eyes flickered, a crack in his armor. You're out of your depth, Alex. This company's a machine. It runs because I make sure the gears don't squeak. You start poking around, you'll break it. He leaned in, voice a low growl. And trust me, the board won't thank you for it. Alexander held his ground, heart pounding. If there's dirt, I'm finding it. Elena's not wrong, people are talking. Unpaid overtime, accidents swept under the rug. Sound familiar? He watched Victor's face, searching for a tell. The COO's jaw twitched, a hairline fracture in his composure. You think you can play hero? Victor sneered, turning to pour a scotch, his movements too casual, too controlled. Those workers? They're replaceable. Always will be. You bring that woman back, you're inviting trouble. She's nobody. Let her stay that way. He sipped his drink, eyes cold as ice. And if you're sniffing around the basement, you'd better be ready for what you find. Alexander's blood boiled, but he caught the threat in Victor's tone, a warning laced with something darker, like he knew about the note, the emails. I'm not afraid of you, Victor, he said, voice low, deadly. If there's a mess, I'm cleaning it, with or without you. He turned to leave, but Victor's voice stopped him cold. Careful, Alex, Victor called, his tone dripping with menace. Some truths cost more than you can afford. The words hung in the air, a noose tightening around Alexander's resolve. He stormed out, the door slamming behind him, but Victor's smirk lingered in his mind, a predator biding its time. Downstairs, whispers spread among the staff. Miguel, the janitor, caught Alexander's eye in the hall, his nod quick but heavy with meaning. Elena's asking questions too, he muttered, passing by. Watch your back. The air felt charged, like a storm brewing in the tower's underbelly. Alexander clutched the note in his pocket, its words a pulse matching his own. Victor wasn't just a hurdle. He was a wall, guarding something rotten. And Elena, out there in her truck, was already pulling at the threads of a truth that could unravel everything. As Alexander stepped into the elevator, the doors closing with a hiss, he felt the weight of Victor's warning, but also a spark of defiance. Whatever was in that basement, he and Elena would face it, together. Elena's boots echoed on the cracked linoleum of the community center, her hands still raw from scrubbing floors. The note, check the basement files. They hide the truth burned in her pocket, its words a pulse driving her forward. Alexander's offer of a new role at Thorne Enterprises sat heavy in her chest. Not a lifeline, but a leash she wasn't ready to wear. She'd agreed to return, but not as his pawn. She'd be his reckoning. The company's gleaming tower hid something rotten, and she'd tear it open. For Javier, for herself, for every invisible worker who'd been crushed under its weight. She met Alexander at a diner across from the company's headquarters, the neon sign buzzing like her nerves. He slid into the booth, his tailored coat out of place among the chipped mugs and grease-stained menus. You're sure about this? He asked, voice low, eyes scanning her face. Victor's already circling. This could get ugly. Elena's jaw tightened, her fingers gripping the note she'd pulled from her bag. Ugly's where I've lived, Thorne. I'm not scared of your COO. She slid the note across the table, its edges worn from her touch. This came from someone who worked for you. They knew something. We start there. Alexander's eyes narrowed, reading the scrawl. The basement again. He leaned back, his fingers drumming a tense rhythm. That email I got, it said the same thing. Someone's trying to tell us something. He met her gaze, a flicker of respect breaking through his usual steel. You're not just here for Javier, are you? Her lips pressed thin, a fire sparking in her chest. I'm here for everyone you and Victor stepped on. Let's move. She stood, her movements sharp. No room for doubt. Alexander followed, his silence a grudging acknowledgement of her lead. They slipped into Thorne Enterprises after hours, the lobby's marble floors gleaming under dim lights. Elena's old employee ID, still active thanks to Alexander's pull, granted them access to the service elevator. It groaned as it descended, the air growing colder, heavier, like the building itself held its breath. The basement was a maze of concrete and shadows, lined with rusted file cabinets and crates marked archive. Dust clung to Elena's throat, but her eyes were sharp, scanning for answers. Start with the oldest files, she said, voice a whip crack in the silence. Anything on accidents, injuries, payouts. Alexander nodded, prying open a cabinet, its hinges screaming. They worked in tandem, Elena's hands swift and precise, pulling folders labeled with dates from a decade ago. Her fingers brushed a file marked Incident Reports, 2008, its edges yellowed. She flipped it open, her pulse spiking. A name caught her eye. Carlos Mendoza, maintenance. Workplace injury, case closed. No details, just a cold stamp. Settled. This is it, she whispered, shoving the file at Alexander. Carlos was my friend. He died after a fall in the loading dock. They said it was his fault, drunk on the job, but he didn't drink. Her voice trembled, not with tears but with fury, her nails digging into the paper. They buried it. Alexander's face darkened, scanning the report. No investigation, no coroner's note, just a payout to his widow. He slammed the file shut, his breath ragged. Victor signed off on this. He was operations manager then. Elena's eyes blazed. Keep looking, there's more. They tore through cabinets, unearthing more files. Workers injured, fired, or silenced with meager checks. Each name was a ghost, a life erased to protect the company's shine. Elena found a logbook, its pages listing closed cases, with coded notes, non-compliant, terminated. Her stomach churned. This isn't just one accident, it's a system. Alexander's phone buzzed, breaking the tension. Another anonymous email. Look for the red folder. Sub-level 2. He showed it to Elena, his jaw tight. Someone's watching us. They moved deeper, finding a locked door marked Storage B. Alexander's master key clicked, revealing a smaller room, its air thick with mildew. A single red folder sat on a shelf, out of place among the chaos. Elena snatched it, her hands steady despite the adrenaline. Inside were photos, grainy, damning. Workers limping from accidents, a cracked scaffold, a bloodied floor. Attached were internal memos, Victor's signature scrawled across orders to minimize liability. One note chilled her. Mendoza case, ensure silence. No media. Elena's breath hitched, her fingers trembling as she handed it to Alexander. This is what they hid. Carlos didn't fall. He was pushed by their negligence. Alexander's face was stone, but his eyes burned. Victor knew. He's been running this cover-up for years. He stuffed the folder into his coat, his voice low, lethal. We need more. Something airtight. Elena nodded, her resolve a fire that wouldn't die. Then we keep digging. For Carlos. For all of them. They locked eyes, a silent pact forming in the basement's gloom. The files around them seemed to whisper, their secrets clawing free. But footsteps echoed above, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the silence. Someone was coming, someone who didn't want them there. Elena's hand tightened on the folder, her heart a war drum. The truth was close, but so was the danger. Elena's fingers gripped the red folder, its edges biting into her palms as the basement's chill sank into her bones. The grainy photos and memos inside burned in her mind. Carlos Mendoza's death, a scaffold collapse, Victor Harlan's cold orders to bury it. Her pulse hammered, a mix of fury and dread. Alexander stood beside her, his face a mask of steel, but his eyes betrayed a storm. The footsteps above had stopped. but the silence felt like a trap snapping shut. "This is bigger than one accident," Elena said, her voice a low blade, slicing through the stale air. "They didn't just hide Carlos's death. They built a system to erase people like him." Alexander flipped through the folder, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack. "Victor's name is on every memo. He orchestrated this, payoffs, threats, all to keep the company clean." He slammed a fist against a rusted cabinet, the clang echoing like a gunshot. Mendoza wasn't drunk. The scaffold was faulty. They let him die to save a few bucks on repairs. Elena's chest tightened, Carlos's face flashing in her memory, his quick smile, his stories of his daughter. "He told me the equipment was old," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I thought he was just venting. But they knew. Victor knew." She pulled out a memo, its words searing. "Mendoza case closed. Family compensated. No further inquiries." "Compensated," she spat. "His widow got $5,000. $5,000 for a life." Alexander's eyes met hers, a spark of shared fire. This wasn't just negligence. It was murder by indifference. He grabbed another document, a safety report dated weeks before Carlos's death, flagged for urgent repairs, but marked deferred in Victor's handwriting. They chose profit over people, and not just Carlos. He pointed to a list of names, dozens, all low-level workers, all settled after injuries or deaths. Each name was a knife in Elena's gut, her hands trembling as she traced them. She stopped on one entry, Maria Alvarez, 2010. Leg injury, terminated. No claim filed. Her breath hitched. "Maria, she trained me, said she quit after a fall, but this says they fired her. No payout, no nothing." Her voice cracked, but her eyes burned, unyielding. They didn't just cover up accidents. They crushed anyone who spoke up. Alexander's face darkened, the folder shaking in his grip. "Victor's been running this for years, right under my nose." His voice was low, lethal, a man waking to his own blindness. "I signed off on budgets, expansions, never questioning the cost. I let this happen." Elena's gaze snapped to him, sharp as a whip. "Don't play victim, Thorne. You built this machine. Now help me break it." She shoved the folder into her bag, her movements swift, deliberate. "These names, they're not just files. They're people. My people. We're taking this to the top." Alexander nodded, his resolve hardening. "We'll need more than this folder. Something public. Undeniable." He paused, eyes narrowing. "But Victor's not alone. Someone else had to know. Someone higher." The realization hit them both, a cold truth. The rot went deeper, maybe to the board itself. A faint creak sounded from the stairwell, snapping their focus. Elena's heart raced, her hand instinctively clutching the bag. "We're not alone," she whispered, her voice a blade of warning. Alexander's eyes darted to the door, his body tensing. The truth was out, but it came with a cost. Victor's system wasn't just a cover-up, it was a fortress, and they just kicked down the gate. As they moved to leave, the basement seemed to close in, its shadows whispering of more secrets, and the danger waiting to strike. Elena's boots pounded the polished marble of Thorne Enterprises' executive floor, the red folder tucked tight under her arm like a loaded gun. Her pulse thrummed, a war drum fueled by the names in those files. Carlos, Maria, countless others crushed by Victor Harlan's machine. She demanded this meeting, her voice sharp over the phone, cutting through Alexander's hesitation. "Victor needs to face me, now." The elevator doors had barely hissed open when Victor's silhouette loomed in his office doorway, his smirk a blade glinting in the fluorescent light. "Well, well," Victor drawled, leaning against the frame, his eyes raking over Elena with disdain. "The maid's back, playing detective. You think you can waltz in here and throw accusations?" His voice was silk over steel, each word dripping with mockery. He stepped closer, towering over her, his cologne sharp enough to choke. "You're out of your league, Ramirez." Elena's jaw clenched, her nails digging into her palms until they stung. "I'm not here to play," she snapped, slamming the red folder onto his desk. Papers spilled, photos of broken scaffolds, bloodied floors, Victor's signature scrawled on damning memos. "This is your work, Harlan. Carlos Mendoza's blood. Maria Alvarez's life. You buried them to save your bonuses." Victor's smirk flickered, a crack in his armor, but he recovered fast, snatching a photo and tossing it back. Old news. Accidents happen. People get paid. You think this, he jabbed the folder, changes anything? You're a nobody. Always will be. His voice dropped, low and venomous. Walk away, or I'll make sure you and that sick kid of yours disappear for good. Her blood ran cold, but her eyes burned, unyielding. Threaten my son again, she said, voice a low growl, and I'll tear your world apart with my bare hands. She stepped forward, closing the gap, her presence a fire that refused to be snuffed. You don't scare me, Victor. I've lived harder days than you can imagine. Victor laughed, sharp and cruel, but his fingers twitched, betraying unease. Bold words for someone who sleeps in a truck. He leaned in, breath hot on her face. You think Alex is your savior? He's in over his head, just like you. I run this company. Cross me, and I'll have security drag you out. Again. Alexander, who'd been silent in the doorway, stepped forward, his face a storm. Enough, Victor. His voice was a blade cutting through the tension. She's not alone. I've seen the files. Your signature's on every lie. He held up a memo, its words damning. Minimize liability. Silence Mendoza's widow. You're done. Victor's eyes darted between them. A predator cornered. You're betting on her? He sneered, turning to Alexander. A CEO groveling to a maid? The board will eat you alive. He grabbed his phone, fingers flying. Security. Executive floor. Now. His smirk returned, colder. Let's see how far your little crusade gets you. Elena's heart raced, but she held her ground. The folder her shield. The elevator pinged and two guards appeared, their faces hard but hesitant. Victor pointed at Elena. Get her out. She's trespassing. The guards stepped forward, but Alexander raised a hand, his voice ice. Touch her, and you're fired. Stand down. The guards froze, caught in the crossfire. Elena seized the moment, her voice ringing out. You can't bury this, Victor. These files, she slapped the folder again, they're going public. Every worker you silenced, every life you broke. I'm their voice now. Her words were a vow, each one a hammer strike. Victor's face twisted, rage breaking through his mask. He lunged, snatching the folder and hurling it at the wall. Papers scattered like shrapnel. You think you can ruin me? He roared, grabbing Elena's arm, his grip bruising. I'll make sure you never work again. You'll beg on the streets. Elena yanked free, her eyes blazing. I've begged for nothing, she spat, shoving him back, her strength born of years surviving men like him. Alexander moved to intervene, but a third figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a dark coat, hired muscle, his presence a silent threat. Victor's smirk returned. Last chance, Ramirez. Leave, or you won't walk out. Elena's breath hitched, her son's face flashing in her mind. The danger was real, but so was her fire. She locked eyes with Alexander, a silent signal. They weren't backing down. The scattered papers lay like a battlefield, and the truth was their weapon. But as the hired man stepped closer, his hand slipping to his pocket, the air thickened with a new threat, one that could end this fight before it reached the world outside. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs as she stumbled back from Victor's grip, the hired man's shadow looming like a storm cloud in the corner of the office. Papers from the red folder lay scattered across the floor, each one a ghost of a silenced worker, their truths now at risk of being buried again. Victor's sneer was a blade, his voice dripping venom. You're done, Ramirez, both of you. The hired man's hand lingered in his pocket, a silent promise of violence. Elena's eyes flicked to Alexander, her jaw tight, her mind racing. They needed something more, something Victor couldn't burn. Get out, Alexander growled, stepping between Elena and the thug, his voice a low thunder. You're not touching her. His eyes burned, not with the cold arrogance of the CEO who'd fired her, but with a fire forged in the basement's truths. He turned to Elena, voice urgent. We need the final piece, something they can't deny. Elena nodded, her pulse a war drum. The red folder's not enough. There's more. There has to be. Her mind flashed to the anonymous emails, the note, the basement waits. Sublevel 2, she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the tension. The email mentioned a red folder, but there's something else down there. Something bigger. Victor laughed, a jagged sound that grated her nerves. You think you'll find a smoking gun? That basement's a graveyard of old paper. You're chasing shadows. But his eyes darted, a flicker of fear betraying his bravado. Elena caught it, her resolve hardening. He was scared. Keep him here, she told Alexander, her voice a whip crack. I'm going back. She didn't wait for his reply, bolting for the door, dodging the hired man's grab with a twist of her body. His fingers grazed her arm, but she was faster, fueled by years of surviving on instinct. The guards, still frozen by Alexander's command, didn't move as she sprinted to the service elevator. The red folder clutched tight. The doors closed with a hiss, sealing her in with her own heartbeat. The basement was darker now, the air thicker, like it knew what she was after. Her boots echoed on the concrete, each step a defiance of Victor's threats. Sublevel 2 was a labyrinth of locked doors and forgotten crates, but the email's words guided her like a map. She found the storage room from before, its door still ajar, and slipped inside. The red folder had been a start, but the email hinted at more. A server, a hard drive, something digital that couldn't be shredded. She tore through shelves, her hands raw from prying open boxes, dust stinging her eyes. A locked cabinet caught her attention, its padlock rusted but stubborn. She grabbed a crowbar from a nearby crate, her muscles straining as she snapped the lock, the clang echoing like a gunshot. Inside was a small external drive, its label faded but legible. Incident Archives, 2005-2015. Her breath caught, her fingers trembling as she plugged it into an old laptop she found nearby, its screen flickering to life. The drive was a goldmine, videos, emails, internal reports. One file stood out, a grainy security clip from 2008, the loading dock where Carlos Mendoza died. Elena clicked play, her heart in her throat. The footage showed Carlos climbing a scaffold, its bolts visibly loose, shaking under his weight. A supervisor, Victor, younger but unmistakable, stood below, shouting orders, ignoring Carlos's warnings. The scaffold buckled, and Carlos fell, his scream cut short. The clip ended with Victor's voice, cold and clear. Clean it up, no reports. Elena's fist clenched, her nails drawing blood. This was it. The truth, undeniable, caught on tape. She yanked the drive free, but footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoed from the stairwell. The hired man, her pulse spiked, but she shoved the drive into her bag, her mind racing. She couldn't fight him, not here. She scanned the room, spotting a rusted vent grate in the corner. With a grunt, she pried it open, crawling inside, the metal scraping her skin. The vent was tight, claustrophobic, but she pushed through, emerging in a maintenance corridor. Her breath was ragged, but she was alive, the drive safe. Back upstairs, she found Alexander still facing Victor, who was pacing, his composure fraying. You're too late, Victor snarled, but his eyes widened as Elena burst in, the drive raised like a trophy. This, she said, voice ablade, is your end, Harlan. She plugged it into a conference room monitor, the footage of Carlos's fall playing for all to see. Victor's face paled, his smirk gone, replaced by raw panic. Alexander's eyes locked on the screen, his voice low, lethal. This goes public, Victor. Tonight. He turned to Elena, a nod of respect passing between them. You did it. But Elena's gaze didn't waver from Victor. Not yet, she said, her voice iron. This is for Carlos, Maria, all of them. You don't get to walk away. The room crackled with tension, the footage looping, a damning requiem for Victor's empire. But outside, the board was gathering, and the hired man's absence hinted at a bigger threat. The truth was out, but the fight wasn't over. Not until every ghost in those files had its say. HOI 4, Cao Trao Koi Kung Jiem. 12, Sao Trao Vashtran, Lot Ko, Ihanor 802. The conference room pulsed with tension, the monitor's glow casting harsh shadows as the footage of Carlos Mendoza's fall looped. Victor Harlan's cold voice. Clean it up, no reports, ringing like a death knell. Elena stood tall, the external drive in her hand a weapon heavier than any gun. Her eyes bored into Victor, whose face had drained of color, his smirk shattered into a mask of panic. Alexander flanked her, his presence a wall of quiet fury, his voice low and lethal. "You're finished, Victor. This goes to the board, the press, the feds. Tonight." Victor's hands slammed onto the conference table, his knuckles white, his voice a desperate snarl. "You think you can take me down with one video? I built this company's profits. The board won't touch me." He lunged for the drive, but Elena yanked it back, her movements swift, her eyes blazing with years of buried rage. "Don't!" she hissed, her voice a blade sharp enough to cut through his bravado. "You buried Carlos, Maria, dozens more. Their blood's on your hands." The room's glass walls seemed to close in, the city skyline beyond a silent witness. Alexander stepped forward, his phone already out, dialing his head of security. "Get the board in here, now." His tone left no room for argument, each word a hammer strike. Victor's eyes darted to the door, but Elena blocked his path, her stance unyielding, the drive raised like a verdict. "You don't run anymore," she said, her voice steady, carrying the weight of every worker silenced by his schemes. The board filed in, their faces a mix of confusion and irritation, suits crisp but eyes wary. Elena didn't flinch, her heart a war drum as she plugged the drive into the main projector. The footage played again. Carlos's fall, Victor's orders, the damning memos flashing one by one. Gasps rippled through the room, the board's murmurs turning to stunned silence. A senior member, Margaret Klein, stood, her voice trembling. "Victor, is this true?" Victor's laugh was desperate, cracking. "It's fabricated. She's a disgruntled maid, spinning lies." He pointed at Elena, his finger shaking. "You trust her over me?" But the footage looped, relentless, and his lies crumbled under its weight. Elena stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. "I was your maid. You're nobody. But I'm their voice now." She gestured to the screen, where names of silenced workers scrolled. Carlos, Maria, others. "You paid them off or fired them. You let them die to save your bonuses." Margaret's eyes widened, turning to Alexander. "You knew about this?" Alexander's jaw tightened, guilt flashing across his face. "I didn't, but I do now, and we're ending it." He nodded to Elena, a silent handoff. She took the floor, her presence commanding, no longer invisible. "This company's built on their backs," she said, her voice a fire that burned through the room. "You ignored them. Victor crushed them. No more." The board erupted, voices clashing, some defensive, others outraged. Victor tried to bolt, but security blocked the door, their faces grim, loyal to Alexander now. Elena held up the drive, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This is going public. Tonight, every news outlet, every lawyer, every worker you forgot. You can't bury the truth anymore." Her words were a gavel, final and unyielding. Victor's shoulders slumped, defeat creeping into his eyes. "You'll ruin everything," he muttered. But the fight was gone, his empire of lies collapsing. Alexander stepped beside Elena, his voice a low promise. "Not everything, just you." He turned to the board, his tone iron. "We vote now, Victor's out, and we open a full investigation. Every accident, every payout." The board's silence was deafening, their faces pale as the truth sank in. Elena's gaze swept the room, her heart pounding but steady, Javier's face anchoring her. She'd faced Victor, exposed him, and survived. But as the board began to vote, a shadow lingered. The hired man was still out there, and the basement's secrets might not all be on that drive. The truth was free, but the war wasn't over. The boardroom was a battlefield, its air thick with the wreckage of Victor Harlan's empire. Elena stood at the center, the external drive still warm in her hand, its footage of Carlos Mendoza's death now seared into the board's stunned silence. Victor slumped in a chair, his face ashen, the fight drained from his eyes as security flanked him. Alexander's voice cut through the tension, sharp and final. "You're out, Victor. Effective now." He turned to the board, his jaw set like stone. "All in favor?" Hands rose one by one, a reluctant tide of agreement. Margaret Klein, the senior board member, stood, her voice steady but heavy. "Harlan's terminated, and we're cooperating with any investigation. Federal, civil, all of it. Her eyes flicked to Elena, a nod of respect. You've exposed a cancer. We owe you. Elena's chest tightened, not with triumph, but with the weight of the names. Carlos, Maria, the dozens buried in those files. Don't owe me, she said, her voice a blade slicing through their guilt. Owe them, the ones you let die or disappear. Her gaze swept the room, unyielding, her hands steady despite the fire in her veins. She wasn't their savior. She was their mirror. Victor's head snapped up, his voice a weak snarl. You think this ends me? I'm not the only one who knew. But his words fell flat, ignored as security hauled him to his feet. Handcuffs clicked, a sound sharper than any gavel. An officer entered, badge gleaming, reading charges. Fraud, negligence, obstruction. Victor's eyes darted, searching for an escape that didn't exist. This isn't over, he muttered, but the door slammed shut behind him, sealing his fate. Alexander turned to Elena, his face raw with resolve. The feds have the drive. They're pulling every file, every case. Payouts are being reopened. Carlos's widow, Maria, all of them. His voice cracked, guilt lingering. I should have seen it sooner. Elena's eyes met his, hard but not unkind. You see it now. That's enough to start. She clutched the drive, its weight a reminder of the lives it carried. The board dispersed, their whispers of reform already taking root. Outside, news vans gathered, cameras flashing, hungry for the story. Victor's downfall was just the beginning. The company's rot would be laid bare, every ghost given a voice. Elena stepped toward the door, her heart steady, Javier's face anchoring her. The truth had won, but the cost was still settling, and the shadows of the basement lingered, hinting at battles yet to come. Elena stood in the glass-walled lobby of Thorne Enterprises, the morning sun slicing through the city's skyline, casting sharp lines across her face. The weight of Victor's handcuffed exit still lingered, but her focus was razor-sharp, fixed on the future. The red folder in its drive had torn open the company's secrets. Carlos's death, Maria's silencing, countless others. But justice wasn't enough. Not yet. Her hands clenched, nails biting into her palms as she faced Alexander. You said you'd fix this, she said, her voice a low, steady fire. Prove it. Not just for me, for them. Alexander's eyes met hers, no longer the cold CEO who'd fired her, but a man cracked open by his own blindness. I will, he said, his voice rough, resolute. No more shadows, no more ghosts. He gestured to the lobby, where workers, janitors, clerks, maintenance crew, watched from the edges, their whispers a quiet tide of hope and doubt. Start with what you'd change. Elena's jaw tightened, her mind racing with the faces of those she'd served alongside. Pay them what they're worth, she said, each word a hammer strike. Minimum wage for maximum work? That's theft and safety. Fix the equipment. No more broken scaffolds. No more deaths. Her voice rose, drawing eyes, but she didn't falter. And give them a voice. No one should be invisible here. Alexander nodded, his face set like stone. Done. But we go bigger. He pulled out his phone, dialing his CFO, his voice sharp. Freeze all executive bonuses. Redirect the funds, new wages, safety upgrades, full health coverage for every worker, starting today. He hung up, turning back to Elena. That's step one. Her eyes narrowed, searching for a catch, but his gaze held steady, raw with purpose. Step two, he continued, is a fund. For workers like Carlos's widow, Maria, we failed everyone. I'm calling it the Mendoza Fund. He paused, his voice softening. You name the amount. Elena's breath caught, Javier's hospital bills flashing in her mind. 2,187, a number etched into her soul. 10 million, she said, her voice iron. Start there, and I oversee it. No suits, no board, just me. Her demand was a blade, daring him to flinch. Alexander didn't. Agreed, he said, his hand extended, not as a boss, but as a partner. She shook it, her grip firm, her heart pounding with a mix of triumph and wariness. This wasn't redemption, it was accountability, and she'd hold him to it. The next week, the Mendoza Fund launched in a quiet ceremony, No cameras, just workers and their families packed into the company cafeteria. Elena stood at a makeshift podium, her old employee ID pinned to her jacket like a badge of survival. "This isn't charity," she said, her voice clear, cutting through the crowd's murmurs. "It's what you're owed. For Carlos, for Maria, for every hour you gave this place." She held up a check for Carlos's widow, her hands steady, eyes burning with purpose. The room erupted, not in cheers but in a deep felt hum of gratitude. Workers nodding, some wiping tears. Alexander stood at the back, his presence unobtrusive but heavy. He'd rewritten contracts overnight, raising wages, mandating safety audits. The board had pushed back, but he'd silenced them with a single line: "We pay for our mistakes, or we lose everything." The news spread fast. Headlines screamed of Thorne Enterprises' overhaul, of Victor's arrest, of Elena's name as the spark that lit the fire. Elena stepped down, handing out checks to families, her movements precise, her smile reserved but warm. Maria Alvarez, now walking with a cane, gripped her hand. "You didn't forget us," she whispered, her voice thick. Elena's throat tightened, but she squeezed back. "Never." Javier, now stable with new meds, watched from a corner, his small smile her anchor. Outside, the city buzzed, but inside, the air felt new, like a storm had passed. Alexander approached, his voice low. "This is just the start, Elena. I'm rewriting the company. Transparency, accountability. You in?" She studied him, her heart a steady drum. "I'm in, but I'm watching you, Thorne." Her words were a vow, not a threat, a promise to hold the line. As she left the cafeteria, workers parted for her, their nods a quiet salute. The Mendoza Fund wasn't just money. It was a signal, a crack in the system that had crushed them. Elena's boots echoed on the marble, each step a declaration. She wasn't invisible anymore. But in her bag, the note, "Check the basement files," still whispered, hinting at shadows yet to be faced, a reminder that truth came with a cost. Elena stood in the community center's modest courtyard, the late afternoon sun painting the cracked pavement gold. Her boots, worn but steady, grounded her as she faced a small crowd. Workers, families, and a few reporters who'd caught wind of the Mendoza Fund's first outreach event. Javier, his cheeks fuller now, thanks to steady meds, clutched her hand, his comic book tucked under his arm. The air hummed with hope, but Elena's heart beat with purpose, not triumph. Victor Harlan's arrest and the company's overhaul had cracked open a door, but she knew better than to trust sunlight alone. Her eyes scanned the crowd, sharp and unyielding, ready to hold the world accountable. Alexander stood beside her, his suit swapped for a simple jacket, his presence quieter now, stripped of its old arrogance. The Mendoza Fund's banner hung behind them, its bold letters a promise, for the invisible. Elena gripped a microphone, her voice clear, cutting through the murmurs. "This isn't about me," she said, her words a blade honed by years of being unseen. "It's about us, the ones who clean your floors, fix your machines, carry your loads. We're not ghosts anymore." Her gaze locked on the crowd, each face a mirror of her own fight. Janitors, drivers, single mothers, all nodding, their eyes fierce with recognition. She handed out scholarships first, checks drawn from the fund's $10 million, each one a lifeline. Maria Alvarez, leaning on her cane, took hers with trembling hands. "For my son's college," she whispered, tears spilling. Elena's throat tightened, but her grip on Maria's hand was iron. "He'll make you proud," she said, her voice steady, a vow. Javier tugged her sleeve, pointing to a girl his age clutching a similar check, her smile wide. "She's like me, Mama," he said, and Elena's heart clenched, her fire burning brighter. Alexander stepped forward, his voice low but carrying weight. "Thorne Enterprises failed you," he said, facing the crowd. No trace of the CEO who'd once fired Elena without a glance. "I failed you, but we're rebuilding. Better wages, safer equipment, open doors. And this fund," he gestured to the banner, "it's yours, not mine." The crowd stirred, some clapping, others watching, wary but hopeful. Elena caught his eye, a nod passing between them. Not forgiveness, but partnership, hard-won and fragile. A reporter raised a hand, her question sharp. Ms. Ramirez, you went from sleeping in a truck to leading this. What's next? Elena's lips pressed thin, her mind flashing to the basement, the red folder, the ghosts still whispering. Next, she said, her voice a spark igniting the air. We keep fighting. For every name in those files, every story buried. This fund is a start, not an end. Her words were a call, not a conclusion. And the crowd roared, their applause a deep felt pulse, not loud but real. The event wound down, families dispersing with checks and hope. Elena knelt beside Javier, adjusting his jacket. You proud of me, mijo? She asked, her voice soft but fierce. He grinned, nodding, and handed her a daisy from the courtyard's edge. You're my hero, Mama. Her eyes stung, but she smiled, tucking the flower into her hair, her heart swelling with a love that had carried her through the dark. Alexander lingered, watching the crowd thin. You changed this place, he said, his voice rough, almost reverent. You changed me. Elena stood, her gaze steady, unflinching. Don't thank me, Thorne. Just don't forget. She gestured to the workers still milling about, their faces lit with cautious hope. They're your company now, not your profits. He nodded, his jaw tight, but a spark of something new in his eyes. Humility, maybe, or purpose. I won't forget, he said, his hand brushing a small plaque on the podium, engraved with Carlos Mendoza, 2008. We'll put one in every building. Their names, not ours. Elena's chest warmed, a rare crack in her armor. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. As the sun dipped, Elena and Javier walked back to their new apartment, a modest place funded by her new role overseeing the Mendoza Fund. The truck was gone, traded for stability, but she kept its keys in her pocket, a reminder of the edge she'd survived. Inside, Javier ran to his room, his laughter a sound she'd fought for. She stood at the window, the city sprawling below, its lights no longer cold but alive, pulsing with possibility. A final anonymous email had come that morning. No sender, just a line. You woke the ghosts. They're free now. Elena's fingers traced the words on her phone, her mind drifting to the basement, its shadows lighter but not gone. She'd found a list in the drive's files. More names, more cases, some tied to board members still dodging accountability. The fight wasn't over, but she wasn't alone anymore. Miguel, Maria, the workers, they were her army now, their voices rising. Alexander joined her at the window, his reflection faint but steady. What's next for you? He asked, his voice low, no longer commanding but curious. Elena's eyes didn't leave the city. I keep going, she said, her voice iron, tempered by fire. For Javier, for them, for me. She turned to him, her gaze a challenge. And you staying in this fight? He nodded, a vow in his eyes. Till it's done. They stood in silence, the city humming below. A new family forged not by blood but by truth. The Mendoza Fund wasn't just money, it was a promise, a crack in the system that had tried to break her. Elena's hand rested on Javier's comic book, left on the table, its hero staring up with fierce eyes. She smiled, faint but real. She'd been that hero not by choice but by necessity. The lesson wasn't spoken, but it burned in the air. No one is invisible unless you choose to look away. Empathy, accountability. They weren't gifts, they were demands, carved from the pain of those who'd been erased. Elena stepped back, her boots echoing softly, each step a declaration of a future she'd build, not beg for. The city watched, and for the first time, it saw her back.